Wherever the road takes you, there's always a story to tell. Welcome to the Traveling Narrator, your perfect companion for the journey ahead. Sit back, drive safe, and let's dive in. Today's story is called The Grand Hotel Conspiracy. Daniel Whitmore had always chased the truth. For years, he uncovered conspiracies, exposed corruption, and followed rumors that no one else dared to investigate. His last story led him to the Grand Oak Hotel, a place whispered about in coded messages, hidden in classified documents, and linked to dozens of unexplained disappearances. 1 week after checking in, he vanished. No one reported it. No police investigation. It was as if he had never existed. But before he disappeared, he left behind one thing. A message buried in an encrypted email sent to an old colleague. If anything happens to me, tell Charlie Beckett to finish what I started. Charlie Beckett wasn't an investigator. He was a journalist, yes, but he wrote about history, travel, and forgotten places. The closest he'd ever come to danger was getting lost in an underground catacomb. So when he received an anonymous message containing Daniel Whitmore's last known whereabouts, he almost ignored it. Almost. But something about the Grand Oak Hotel felt wrong. A building with no official records before 1923. Guests who never checked out. Staff members who had worked there for decades but had no public history. And now, a journalist who had vanished without a trace. Charlie had spent his life chasing forgotten stories. This time, the story was chasing him. The Grand Oak Hotel stood like a monument to the past, its towering facade wrapped in ivy, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. The building loomed over him as he stepped onto the sidewalk, his breath misting in the cold night air. The hotel had a presence, a kind of quiet, suffocating authority. Something unspoken hung in the air, a feeling that made the hairs on his arms rise. It wasn't just old, it was aware. Inside, the lobby was grand, but too perfect. Ornate chandeliers bathed the room in an amber glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors. But there were no scuff marks, no imperfections, no signs of time. The guests moved too smoothly. Their laughter was too rehearsed. And behind the front desk, the receptionist met his gaze with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Beckett," she said. "Or should I say, Mr. Whitmore?" His stomach twisted. "I don't know anyone by that name." Her smile didn't falter. "Of course you don't." She slid a key card for room 707 across the counter. "Enjoy your stay," she murmured. "And remember, curiosity can be dangerous." Charlie took the key, his fingers tightening around it. He could already feel the trap closing around him. Inside, room 707, the first thing he noticed was the notebook. Worn leather cover, pages filled with frantic notes, sketches of the hotel's layout, and a name scrawled over and over. The Hollow Society. Charlie flipped through the pages, his pulse quickening. Whitmore had been investigating something buried deep within the hotel. A hidden organization that operated beneath the surface, controlling something much larger than just this place. But Whitmore's final entry sent a chill down Charlie's spine. "They know I've found the passage. If I don't send a signal by midnight, I'm already gone." Charlie checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. Before he could process it, his phone buzzed. A block number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice whispered through the line. "You need to leave. Now." Then, click. The phone went silent. Charlie stood frozen, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The weight of the leather notebook in his hands suddenly felt heavier. "You need to leave. Now." The voice had been urgent, almost frantic, but who was it? Charlie flipped back to Whitmore's last notes. Scribbled between floor plans and hastily written theories, he found one address, not inside the hotel, but just outside its grounds. The Hollow Society, Vanguard Archive, 116 Norwood Lane. Not part of the hotel itself. A real-world lead. Charlie grabbed his bag and stuffed the notebook inside. Whatever Whitmore had found, it had been enough to make him disappear. And if someone had just risked warning him, then staying inside this room was a death sentence. He slipped out the door, making his way toward the emergency exit. That's when he saw the man in the hallway. A dark suit, perfectly tailored. An earpiece, barely visible. Hands clasped in front of him, standing completely still. Watching. Waiting. Charlie turned, forcing himself to walk casually toward the elevator. But as he passed, the man spoke. "You won't find what you're looking for, Mr. Beckett." Charlie stopped cold. Daniel Whitmore thought he could run too. The doors slid open. Without looking back, Charlie stepped inside and hit the lobby button. The doors closed just as the man turned toward him. The message was clear. They knew he was here. Charlie didn't stop moving until he reached the street. The cold night air hit him like a slap. He flagged down a cab, rattling off the address from Whitmore's notes. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You sure about that place?" Charlie hesitated. "Why?" The driver shrugged. "Nothing out there but an old records office. Not much to see." Charlie leaned back, his mind racing. If the Hollow Society was real, they were powerful enough to erase records, people, entire histories. Whitmore had found something. Something they wanted buried. The cab pulled up in front of a nondescript 2-story brick building. The sign out front read, "Vanguard Historical Archive." It looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Charlie stepped inside. The air smelled of old books and dust, the overhead lights flickering faintly. Behind a desk, a librarian, an older woman with silver hair, looked up from her reading glasses. "Can I help you?" Charlie hesitated. Then, "I'm looking for records on the Grand Oak Hotel." The woman studied him. "I'm sorry, but those records aren't public." Charlie placed Whitmore's notebook on the desk and flipped to the Hollow Society page. Her expression changed. Without a word, she stood and walked to a locked filing cabinet. With a single key, she opened the drawer and pulled out a single manila folder. "This is all we have," she said quietly. "But if you were smart, you'd leave now." Charlie opened the folder. Inside were black and white photos, old blueprints, and a roster of names. At the top of the first page, stamped in faded ink, was a name that made his stomach drop. The Hollow Society, establishment year 1923. The same year the hotel's official records began. Charlie flipped through the documents. The Grand Oak Hotel had once been a private estate, owned by a man named Reginald Mercer. A billionaire industrialist with government contracts, political ties, and a habit of making people disappear. One name stood out among the files. Frank Holloway, missing 1923. A former journalist investigating Mercer's business dealings. Charlie's blood ran cold. Hollow Society. The name wasn't just a symbol. It came from a man who had been silenced. But the last page of the file was what stopped him completely. A roster. A list of names. Names of people who had stayed at the Grand Oak and never left. Daniel Whitmore's name was at the bottom. The second to last entry. The last name on the list? Charlie Beckett. His hands went numb. His mouth went dry. Someone had already prepared this. They knew he was coming. Footsteps. Charlie barely had time to react before he saw the black SUV pull up outside the archive. The librarian grabbed his wrist. "You have 30 seconds to get out." She pushed a side door open just as the front entrance swung wide. Charlie didn't look back. He ran. Through the alley, past dumpsters, across an empty parking lot. Tires screeched behind him. A car door slammed. Then, a gunshot. Charlie ducked behind a delivery truck, heart pounding. The man in the dark suit stepped into the street, scanning the area. "Mr. Beckett," the man called. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Charlie's grip tightened on Whitmore's notebook. "You have two choices," the man continued. "You can come with us, or you can disappear like the rest." Charlie's eyes flicked to a storm drain just a few feet away. An escape. A long shot. But his only shot. He took a breath. Then he ran. The sewer tunnel was cold and wet, the sound of voices echoing behind him. Charlie ran, twisting through the underground maze until he reached a ladder leading up to the surface. He emerged outside the city. Fields stretched before him, the Grand Oak Hotel glowing in the distance. It had never just been a hotel. It was headquarters, a place where powerful people wiped names from history. Charlie pulled out his phone. He still had the roster, the names, the proof. For the first time, he had leverage, and he knew exactly what he had to do. If the Hollow Society wanted him to disappear, he'd make sure the world knew they existed first. 2 days later, an anonymous email was sent to every major news outlet. Attached was a file, names, records, blueprints. Inside the Grand Oak Hotel, a phone rang at the reception desk. The receptionist answered. A voice on the other end simply said, "Check the news." A pause. Then, "We're not the ones chasing anymore." The hunt had just begun. The broadcast spread like wildfire. News anchors scrambled to dissect the files, journalists pored over the records, and government agencies were suddenly forced to answer questions they had long buried. The Hollow Society had survived in the shadows for over a century. Now they were exposed. Charlie didn't stop running. He moved from safe house to safe house, staying off the grid. He changed phones, wiped his digital footprint, and trusted no one. But even as he hid, he watched the world react. The Grand Oak Hotel was shut down within 48 hours. Investigations launched overnight. Former guests, people who had escaped but never spoken, came forward with horror stories. And then came the arrests. Politicians, business moguls, intelligence officers, people who had used the hotel as a gatekeeper to power. Some ran. Some vanished before the authorities could reach them. But some, the ones at the very top, were untouchable. They had built their influence carefully, buried their trails deep. They had spent generations ensuring no one could truly bring them down. Charlie knew this. So he went after the one person who could bring the whole thing crumbling down. Reginald Mercer had died in 1964, but the Hollow Society had never been about one man. There was always a successor. Charlie had spent weeks tracing the current leader, the one who pulled the strings from behind the curtain. It all led back to Jonathan Mercer, Reginald's grandson, a man who had never been in the public eye. No interviews, no social media, no records beyond quiet investments in real estate, media, and private security firms. But Charlie had learned something over the past few weeks. The Hollow Society didn't just control people. They erased them. And Jonathan Mercer's secret? He wasn't untouchable. He was in hiding. because his own people had turned on him. Charlie found him in a private airfield outside Geneva. Mercer was trying to disappear before the last of his empire collapsed. Charlie had expected armed guards. He expected a man who fought back. Instead, he found a ghost of a man pacing nervously inside a dimly lit hangar, watching the news on a small monitor. He knew it was over. Charlie stepped forward, holding out the final copy of the files. "This is everything," he said. "Every transaction, every name, every deal made in secret. If you testify, if you bring the rest down with you, you might survive this." Mercer didn't even hesitate. He took the files, because he knew the rules of survival, and the Hollow Society had already abandoned him. The trial lasted 6 months. Jonathan Mercer named names. He handed over documents no one else could access. He testified before the world, exposing decades of blackmail, disappearances, and political manipulation. It was the biggest scandal in modern history. And at the center of it all was Charlie Beckett. Months later, Charlie stood on a quiet pier, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world now knew what Daniel Whitmore had died for. But there was one final page in Whitmore's notebook. A single sentence, scribbled in fading ink. "The truth isn't about winning. It's about making sure they can never hide again." Charlie let out a slow breath. He had done it. Not for glory. Not for revenge. But so the next person who came looking wouldn't have to vanish just to find the truth. He tossed the notebook into the waves. Then he turned and walked away. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an adventure. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your mind on the story.